Hey everybody, P.A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show, bringing you our episode today. Now look, when I say the word spy versus spy, I hope you guys get excited as I do. I love telling these stories and from the point of view that only someone like me can do it. Now look, if you don't know my background, I've got multiple combat tours. I've been outside the wire a lot as a spy. Okay, so when I talk about spy versus spy, I really know what I'm talking about. Today's episode is a guy named Roman Roberts. Now, Roman has his own podcast called Real Talk with Roman. Go to YouTube, you'll find that, and you'll love that, what he's doing. Okay, but let's get back to what he was. He was an interrogator. Now, interrogators and spies, field collectors in general, in theory, work in different worlds. He's probably going to work in a detention center run by MPs, very closed off, secure, all these things. And then I'm going to be out in the field trying to find people to talk to, make friends, and influence folks. Okay, but the reality is our jobs overlap a lot more than that, because he's going to go on patrols and do hasty interviews. Well, that's also what I do. And we're going to try to find things out in the moment so that we can keep everybody safe now, tomorrow, and next week. So a lot of times our jobs overlap. You can find me sometimes in a detention facility, filling in, interrogating, interviewing. So I know these skills. It's not my home skill set, but I'm definitely comfortable with it. So as we talk, you have two people that have mastered the art of interviewing and interrogation from their own perspective, talking about this, giving you real life example. If you capture someone who's placing a bomb on a roadside, right, that's a combatant. That person's not going to want to cooperate, and you're going to have to figure out some way to do it. You're not going to trick them. They don't trust you. They're never going to trust you. And so rookie interrogators they go for the obvious things. There's a thing called Mutt and Jeff. You'll hear me say that a lot. That's just bad cop, good cop. No one really runs that who's seasoned, because it's just, everybody knows it. It becomes a trope. And why would you pull a trope out if you're really doing serious life and death stuff? So what we're going to talk about are the other ways to do it. And guess what we're going to talk about? Building trust. Knocking down walls, getting this person who got caught, look, they've been trained, they've been briefed. Here's what happens if you get caught. Here's the experience. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what's going to happen afterwards. And so they've already got this idea, and they don't need to cooperate. Their friends, their bosses, the people that scare the hell out of them more than us, they are the ones that control that conversation until you can find a different way in. So hard and fast and dominant, that's already been done. You got to find a different way in. And that's what Roman and I talk about today. And I know you're going to love it. I really love this episode. And get this, I learned a lot from it. Just from hearing us talk again, I'm like, oh man, there's so many things in there that I could add into this conversation. So I know you're going to love it. Hey, a couple real quick things. Thank you so much for supporting us at Save the Brave and at the Break It Down show. And we're going to add a new brand to the trilogy. It's Trubify. We're going to start putting live shows up on there. The platform is new, so as they evolve, we're going to be pushing more things over there. We're still going to be able to get your podcast just like you're doing now. But if you want to support us, Trubify is going to be a platform where artists, whether they're musicians, spoken word, comedians, podcasts, where we're going to be able to get paid. For the more people watch, the more we're going to get paid. That's basically how it works. So the show will still be free to you always, even on that platform. But we're going to start talking more about Trubify. And so when you get a chance, download the app. Let me know what you think. We're really early. It's beta. So you're in early looking at this, but you're going to see me talking on there, trying to get these things done. Okay. Listen, one more thing. Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. If you would, whatever you've got, donate it. Time, old boats, property, stock, whatever it is. Help us help people have PTSD, and we will put that money to work and get these folks out there on the water, fishing, in fellowship with other Marines, veterans, whoever it is. We're going to get out there and save some lives. All right, one more thing to say, and I promise you're going to love this show. Definitely put it in the show notes. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me know what you think. Here comes Roman Roberts. Little biospheres. There's the entire ocean, and Jeremy said this, probably got it from somewhere else, but it's like a big bathtub. And when you throw something away, it doesn't go away. It's still there. And so how do we deal with the consumption and the preservation and the lack of abundance? All of these problems give us this ocean problem. So I think it's just an interesting topic to explore. We'll continue to explore, hopefully get a lot more people on talking about it, because that's what we do here on the show. We try to find these problems, illustrate them, and hopefully get us all a little bit smarter so that when we hear a problem, we don't just react. We think and we go, well, there's answers for these questions. There's actual experts out there. All right, enough of me talking about that. Thank you all so much. Really from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate all of the support, all of the comments on the live side, on the podcast side. Just keep coming. If you think I missed you, hit me up, Pete@breakitdownshow.com. I absolutely will respond. I get overwhelmed sometimes. I get behind. Don't feel bad about reminding me. I will respond. But just, come at me, and I'd love to hear from you. And if you have an idea on a show, please hit me up. International, fine. We love international guests. All right, I'm talking too long. Let me get this done by saying Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Donate tab, put a small amount of money in each month, or do one big donation. It can be stocks. It can be your old boat that you don't want anymore, whatever it is. We'll figure out a way to turn it into something that can help us fight PTSD. And the final words I'm going to say to you, Jeremy McCain. Oh, yeah.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
We were just talking off mic. One of my complaints, Roman, is that, by the way, for everybody who's watching, Roman is an interrogator by trade. And so we're going to talk about shop and whatnot, and we're going to do a little spy versus spy stuff. But here's one of the things that bugs me about modern technology is I'm using StreamYard, and I'm going to be critical of StreamYard for a second here because they create problems in my life through their app, and I just want them to deal with it. So like my microphone doesn't reliably get recognized. So it'll recognize my headphones, but it doesn't recognize the microphone. I don't know why, and it drives me crazy. And when I reach out to them and I say, hey, StreamYard, your stuff's not working, they just say, that's weird. Try restarting your computer.
Yeah, it's wild, man.
I was alive in the 90s when that was the default. I understand that. I've taken that step. If I reach out to you, I'm doing that. And then they say, I'm not sure what's going on. And like, yeah, well,
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of the same thing. Like the other day, my wife was at a doctor. I say the other day, like a while back, she was at the doctor, and the doctor was like, that's interesting. And then they Googled it right there on the phone in front of her, right? Like, I feel like that's what everyone's doing nowadays. We're just pulling up Google and saying like, well, we're trying to figure it out too.
Yeah, turns out we don't know. Yeah, the other thing is when there's a lot of, services. We all use them. I pay them money to do the service. Now, like this $15 or it's $20 a month. Hey, Mary. Mary says hi.
Hey.
Then, and I say, hey, there's a problem. Like my T-shirt company, Bonfire. They typically, by their own admission, get back to you and get this 2 weeks to get back to you on a question. And so...
I feel like in 2 weeks you're in a totally different place than you were, And
then the other thing I don't like about these modern companies is I'll say, I have this problem. I'm like, well, here, read this article. Does that help? Like, motherfucker, no. I'm calling you because I need help. I'm not customer support. You are, like,
yeah.
If you need me to go read something that might not be the answer, what are we doing here? Like,
yeah, I do love that. I got on a website the other day and I had a question, and the person directed, I asked them to come on as a guest, right? And the person directed me to this little forum, like, if you want to be a guest, like, read through this, right? And then I was like, okay, or them to come on to be a guest. And I kept reading through it, and then I said, this doesn't even tell me how to contact you. And then they reached back out and they said, hey, thanks for reaching out. Go to this website and check out this link. And then I was like, you know what? I don't even want you on the show that bad. Like, at this point, like, I'm over it.
Yeah. Same thing with Calendly. Everybody likes Calendly, and God bless. If you do, great, keep using it. But as the show producer, it's not your job to produce my show. It's my job. And so if I want you to be on, Roman, I've got to, and you and I had to mess with calendars, and I had to drop off some tires today. We figured it out. But I didn't let a robot do a shitty job of it because I have a very specific way I run my calendar. Like I have 3 reminders, 1 day before, 1 hour before, 10 minutes before. And so, Calendly doesn't do that. And I don't want someone else to run my day for me. I want to run my day so that I have the ability to control it. And I know you can do all those things sort of with Calendly, but I don't.
And that's been, it's funny because that's been a thing for me because Calendly, like everyone's like, hey, send me your Calendly, right? And I'm like, well, what are your availabilities? Because life happens, right? And Calendly, you can cancel it, but it's just sometimes it's so inconvenient. Like I want to have a little bit of that relationship with the person I'm bringing on to say, hey, like, I realize your time is valuable. Like,
Right.
I'm asking you to do the biggest exchange possible. I'm asking you to give me your time to talk about something like
Right.
that's pretty big. And so I think that sometimes, and my wife says it all the time, technology, while it's great, is also the downfall of us, because it ruins that connection and that realism between all of us. And I think that even for something as simple as a calendar invite, we used to have to say, hey, what's good for you? Yeah, let's talk about it. And now it's like, I don't even have to talk to you. Oh, just go straight to my calendar. It's almost like a kind of a push off. Like, I'll just go there. Like,
You think about this, like when I'm booking somebody, if they have an assistant, I go, oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll deal with your assistant. You're busy and I get all that stuff. You're not even pushing me to an assistant now. You're pushing me to a robot. And here's the thing is my percentage of missed shows, because through, when I book through Calendly, it's way too high. So I usually tell the person, I'm not doing that. Let's pick a time. I'm glad to send you a meeting request. I know it's the same thing, but on my end, I have to do it this way, or I may miss something, because again, Calendly doesn't work the way that I work my calendar. And I would rather know, like you and I, again, we had to audible a number of times, and it's just like that happens. And so don't put it, I don't know. It just bugs me,
I'm with you. I think we should be more realizing of life. You know what I mean? Especially now with everything going on, like we're I don't know, we've just become so dependent on, oh, my iPhone will tell me this. Oh, my app will tell me this. Oh, like, cause you can get a reminder for anything. I mean, you can get grills that run off your phone. You can do, we're just losing kind of that I don't know, that connection that we had, even though we're more connected than we've ever been.
Yeah. I mean, we're more connected, but more distant, and we have access to all of the knowledge, but we're not any more wise than we were before, So let's
1,000%.
slide into some of that stuff, though, because we work, at least back when I was, doing the counterintelligence thing and all that stuff. And are you interrogating at all anymore? Or are you done with all the military?
Nope, I am done. I mean, I guess you could call real talk a little bit of an interrogation, but other than that, I'm done.
For sure. And we'll get into that part of it, because this show here is a patrol report. I go out, I find interesting people. I ask them questions about things like, 10 people can go and do the same interview subject, but I will get you better information than those other 9 interviews because of what we do. So when we do these spy versus spy episodes, a lot of what I like to do is sort of break down what happens, when you do your specific thing. Now, look, I am not an interrogator. I have interrogation skills, but you are actually trained in the art of interrogation. One of the things that I like to dispel is that every interrogation ends in what people call Mutt and Jeff in our profession, or good cop, bad cop.
Yes. Definitely, man.
And by the way, everybody apparently is great at counter interrogation. Like they're just, oh yeah, he's just, anyhow, let's dispel Mutt and Jeff / good cop, bad cop.
I love it, man. Honestly, I think I used it once in 8 years in the military. And it's just, truth be told, it's not effective because television has ruined it. Like,
yeah.
It really has, because we now make comedy parodies about a cop sitting in a room and instantly just going like, good cop, bad cop, like we've done this weird thing. So the person across from it can see that it's kind of fake. And I'm not saying it doesn't have a place. Like every other tool has a place.
Sure.
I never found it useful. And especially in the culture of Iraq, Afghanistan, various other Middle Eastern areas, it's just not so much. I mean, you were talking about a group of people that weren't afraid of tanks running in front of them. But if you pulled a pistol out because Saddam would execute people, they would be terrified. Right. So you're dealing with a different mentality. And I think there's just not really any more places where it's super effective. And obviously, I mean, there's probably some people who would be like, I use it all the time, but I never found a use for it. And I think it's unless it's done really, really well and really planned out with someone very well, it's cheesy. It comes across fake because that person has to know when to key off of you at that precise moment. Yeah. And I did it with somebody who I was really, I mean, we had known each other for 5 years at the point where we ran it together. We had done interrogations together. We had trained interrogators together, and it was still rocky. Like, we would talk over each other sometimes. Like, you almost like have to be a sibling to be able to run that. You have to have that kind of connection.
Yeah. Let's talk about your specific time. I'm going to tell my story first, because it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, it's not as simple as they portray it in TV, because it's actual humans actually doing this, and you're actually trying to get somewhere. And so we agree, on the fly, mid-meeting, that we're going to run good cop, bad cop / Mutt and Jeff. And so it's determined that I'm going to be bad cop. And so the pretty girl with the makeup on her face, she's going to be good cop. It makes a lot of sense. Normally, I would like to play good cop. I'm good at that kind of thing. But it just didn't work out personnel-wise. Like, she's the one that, she's got the boobs and everything. So he's running her around in a circle. And I come in, like super tropey. I'm mad. And, I smash my hand on the table like you're supposed to. And I point at him and I tell him to cut this bullshit out and that kind of stuff. And so I provide bad cop. And I'm huffing and puffing. She responds with, and this goes to your point about you and your friend. You know what she responds with? Batter cop.
Yep.
I'm like, dude, like after the meeting, I'm like, what happened? Why did you go batter cop? And she's like, I got so excited. I was so mad at him. So it worked. It absolutely 100% worked, except for I elicited the response from my interrogation partner.
Yeah. So kind of similar for me. I was working at a detention facility at the time, and we had some detainees plan a prison break and actually get part of the way executed on it. So not to dive too much deeper into that, but we basically said, okay, we're going to pull them in and start interrogating and figure out why they did it, how they got resources, all that stuff. And as we were diving into it, in that one, we kind of put the blanket approach strategy of saying, hey, we could use anything and everything. And we ran 48-hour interrogations. I mean, just nonstop, like we were hitting people. Right. And, so we did everything from Pride and Ego Up, all that. But to the Mutt and Jeff, we had that listed, and we said, okay, like if we get to a certain point and we're not seeing anything, we're going to do it. And so it was a group of people that we had all trained together. We had been through this multiple times, a couple deployments together. And so we knew how each other operated, and I always operated as a good cop. So I always operated as kind of a logical, like, hey, like, let's work through this. And that was my strategy. And it worked really well most of the time. So inside of that, I just went in there and said, hey, man, here's what's going on. Obviously, you were involved with this, but and we just talking through it. And the guy wasn't even like being defensive or coming at me. He was just kind of like, yeah, we did, like, because you can't really deny it. You were trying to break out. Yeah, it was obvious, right? So he's like, yeah. And then my buddy comes barreling in, and he's like, you need to tell us everything. And I'm like, whoa, like, okay, we're not even at that place yet, but all right. And so the dude kind of was taken back and kind of freaked out. And so then I was like, hey man, calm down, and pushed him out. And so like we unintentionally kind of started that ball rolling. And then my friend would just come in and kind of the same thing. Like I would have to catch myself, because at moments he would come in bad and I'd be like, you're right, the dude was a jerk. He didn't listen to anything I just said. And then I would kind of come over, and then I'd have to like bring myself down. Yeah. But for the person watching you, like they can see that. So that person was seeing that I would have to throttle myself down. And he's like, dude, this is a complete, like, y'all are gaming me. And he figured it out. Like the biggest mistake we make in interrogations is thinking the person in front of us is stupid. Right. Like that's the problem. Yeah. And so that's why it didn't work. But to that exact point, and I think that's most people who do it, that kind of, because you do get the energy of the room flows off and comes into you, and you kind of react to it. Right. So yeah, that happened, and I would throttle myself down. But the moment you throttle yourself down, it changes the whole dynamic of the power play and who's in control. Right. And so it was just, and at that point, I actually ended up having to switch the interrogation over to him, because he saw the other person as more dominant, and he saw that person as controlling me. And so then I had to walk out, and it ended up working. Like he got a little more information from him. Yeah. But like it truly was not a Mutt and Jeff. All it was it made me look like I was an inferior idiot, and it put the other guy in the position of power to then say, yeah, that dude's dumb. Like, let me help you.
Right. Right. That, it's a good point you brought up, and you talked about a couple techniques. Again, just to illustrate how uneducated in general people are in the interrogation arts, is like you have one tool, which actually has two names, Mutt and Jeff or Good Cop, Bad Cop. But there are dozens of other tools, and you mentioned ego, pride, up and down. There's fear, up and down. There's a number of things that we can do. And then one of the ways to, at least from my point of view, one of the ways to be effective is to be able to recognize that it's time to change into another approach instantly. Like you plan, like if you have the luxury, you plan a long, elaborate plan, which instantly fails,
Always.
But like you're briefing someone higher saying, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try. But in the moment, you're really doing it. It's sort of like, I liken it to like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There is a call and response to every move, but oftentimes you're like, I didn't do that because I knew he was doing this, so I did this. And it's like, it really is, it's a martial art, don't you think?
Definitely. So for me, I always tell people, like, everyone knows how to be an interrogator. You do it. You don't know all the nuance. You know the broad strokes. Like, because every person goes in, and when you're having a conversation, you'll use things to your advantage, whether it's love, hate, ego. Like when people say, oh, that person's egotistical, right? And they can then use that to their advantage.
Yeah.
Like that's really all interrogation is. It's being able to see who that person is and be able to flow the conversation in the way that you want. So for me, I often found that the work you do up front is the real game changer, right? So it's that rapport phase. So we called it the rapport phase. And it's really just getting to know that person. And obviously circumstance dictates, right? So if I'm coming off of shock and awe on the X, I don't have near as much time to say, tell me about your life and your family, right?
Yeah.
But that person also just probably had a flashbang go off in a building. So they're probably in a little different headspace than the person who's sitting in front of me in a detention facility, right? So obviously you have to take the environment into play as well. But I often found, just getting to know people's story, everyone tells you what they value. And that's outside of interrogate, right? So once I joined into civilian, started doing business consulting and talking to people about their business, they instantly tell you what they value in their business, right? They want to tell their story.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would do. And I would have all those things ready. I'd have an idea. Oh, this person has 2 kids or 3 kids, right? Or as I'm like, coming on an X and say, okay, this, there's 3 kids over there, a group of women over there. Probably one of them is a relative of his. He's probably concerned for their well-being, maybe a pride and ego up about how he can be the man of the house and save his family by communicating and clear up this whole discrepancy, right? And that kind of teacher mentality, like, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me how we made a mistake, right? Because people love those kind of things. So I just found that really moving those pieces in the way that the individual relates to only works after you let the individual tell you what relates to them, right? Like, because if I run a pride and ego, like if I tell somebody you're a great person who has given me no signs that they think they're good, they probably think, oh, like I'm worthless because I got caught. Like I actually had that. I had a guy who he got caught planning a bomb, and he was upset that he got caught planning a bomb. Yeah. And I was trying to run this like, hey, like you're doing all this, you were doing this for your country and all of that. And honestly, he was just so pissed off that he got caught. And I didn't pick up on it until my analyst was like, hey, you're totally missing it. Like this dude, he is like head down, upset that he is even here right now. Yeah. Like, go in there and tell him how dumb he is.
Yeah.
And sure enough, like I went in there and I was like, dude, how could you get caught? Like we weren't even supposed to be in that area and you got caught. Like, how do you even do that? Like we weren't even expecting it. And all of a sudden he's like, yeah, man, I know, but they gave me bad information. And then he started talking about the other people, right? So then he started blaming other people. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's that person's fault. It's not your fault. Right. And then he that's when he started getting kind of pride coming up and like, yeah, you're right. It's not my fault. It's their fault. And so it, like you said, it's that instantly knowing when to shift it, right? But you got it. Like anything else, you got to get a foot in the door. Yeah. Like if you can't get in the door, you can't pry it open. And that's any conversation, interrogation or not.
Yeah. Yeah. The desire to push down fear, or up, like in the wrong direction, it's really delicate. And we all learn this honestly by screwing up, like that analyst had to go, hey, dummy. You have other tools in the bag. Oh, that's right, I do. I'm back in there. And it's funny. So fear and ego up or down, pride and ego go together. Fear is a separate one. But like when you have a person and you're like, hey, we've talked to you for 2 hours. I just want you to know that guy over there, that Iraqi guy, and you just point to the Iraqi. He is not the Iraqi, just a guy. That guy's next. We're going to lose control of you and you're going to go to them. So I can vouch for you. I can help you. But right now I've got nothing to work with. It's your last chance. 5 minutes. That's a time close, but same kind of thing. You're like, we could sit there for 72 hours with that guy, and not release him and do everything. But if he sees an out, you want to give him an off ramp, but if you always go hammer on their ego, you're stupid, or you're smart all the time, it doesn't. You have to constantly adapt to where they're at so that you can get just a little left, a little right of where they're at and see if you can nudge them in your direction. At least that's how I kind of think of it in my head. It's like, will this guy come one step closer towards me? No? Okay, let me try something else. Because that's really how I approach it, is I try to get as near that person as I can and see if I can get them in any way, whether it's get angry with me or whatever it is. How do you liken it when you're working and it isn't working yet and you're just getting greasy?
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
When you're working and it isn't working yet and you're just getting greasy.
For me, when it wasn't working, so at first it was unhealthy for me because when it wasn't working, I would blame myself and get so in my head, and that was just bad. Like that pulled me from the room, and then they could see my frustration and everything like that. So eventually I came to a place where it wasn't working because the emotional response wasn't there, whether it was fake or canned or whatever. Like in other interviews, I've talked about how, I would detract or close off my emotions from the entire thing. And that was actually, it led to very unhealthy for me. But the one emotion I would always have was wanting to win and wanting to perfectly mimic whatever they were expressing. Right. So that tied into my desire to win, which is unhealthy in its own way. Right. And so for me, like, I would just look at it as, if I don't get out of this and if I don't figure out how to do this, I'm not going to win. Yeah. And for me, winning was, getting the information to protect the team that I was working with, right? Or getting the information to pull something off the streets to help the next person out there, or to secure a better future, right? So for me, like, I really took that winning seriously, and that was always my mindset. Again, very unhealthy. It led to a lot of future problems for me when I transitioned. But at the time, I could go into those rooms and, it's kind of that same mentality like that I have now that I use as kind of my mantra. Your hustle has to be bigger than your struggle. Yeah. Like, I would go in there with the full intent, like, I'm going to win. I don't care how I got to win. I'm going to win. And I would go in there and I would try everything. And, people would say, oh, that person's a lost cause. And I'd be like, nah, I'm still swinging. Yeah. And I'd go back in. Right. And, so that was how I did it. And honestly, in doing all of that, after about, I don't know, probably like 1,000 interrogations, I came to this conclusion that you can kind of front load the entire thing. And so for me, I basically went in there and said, hey, look, here's the situations. And I would do not really a we know all, which, to your point, that's another approach strategy, right, but basically based on the information, right? Yeah. And so I would basically run something similar and say, hey, like, here's what happened. Here's the situation. And I would do kind of a we know all with logic, right, and say, okay, here's what's going on. Here's the history for this. Here's the trend for this. Like, let's stop BSing and let's just get to the real part. You don't have to tell me everything. You don't have to tell me what you did. I don't care about that. I want to know what everyone else is doing. I want to know what the problems are. And so they would kind of feed that out. And I would start, especially towards the end of some of my deployments, I would start doing just kind of, tell me about your area. What's wrong with it, right? Like the water, the infrastructure, like all these things. Not that I cared about the report. Like there was always a civil engineer that cared about those reports.
Yeah.
Me personally, I thought they were completely pointless.
Yeah.
But they helped them with their village rebuilding efforts and things like that. So I would get that information, but really and truly, that would be the framework for the person to say, yeah, my water's bad because the Taliban keeps coming in and blowing up the water well, right? Well, why do they blow up the water well? Well, because our village mullah is actually against them and he speaks openly about it, but they can't kill him because he's such a high level person in the community. And I'm like, oh, okay. So they basically try to make him look bad by doing this. I'm like, oh, okay, now we've got into propaganda. Now we know who the power player in the village is. Now all because we said, hey, just tell me what's wrong with your area. So I stopped trying to take this just like, I don't know. At the beginning of interrogations, I was a hammer and I saw everything as nails.
Yep.
And then I realized like that is not how it works.
Turns out that's actually not even a nail. It's a banana. Yeah. I'm hitting a banana with a hammer.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, man, it's totally
exactly
true. That's why, like I always say, when you get good, you realize like it's all through mistakes and the elegance that you develop, and you just get very surgical with it. And also the pride. I'm assuming that you learned a lesson that your pride was in your way. And so it stopped being about you and it stopped being about winning. And it's like, how do I do this in a way that, gets this guy out? Because the bottom line is at some point too, especially with like the kind of world we were working in Iraq, Afghanistan, these long wars, is they've been arrested or they know people that have been arrested and they know the path. And so you're dealing with a very limited amount of like, they're not scared of it. It sucks for them, but they also, their counter interrogation technique was just, I'm going to wait you out,
Yeah.
in 2 weeks.
Because they knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
72 hours you were going over, like 72 hours you were going to the Afghans. And especially as the war started to end, right? So I was there early on, right? In like 09. Yeah. 09 was when I did my first stint. And I did my last stint for 2 years from 13 to 15 working in Helmand province, right? And so in that 2 years, as we were pulling out, things were different, right? Like the person you would go interrogate on the X or inside of a booth or the source that would come in, they knew things were changing. And so they were like, I want more money. I want guaranteed security. I want like the request list would become different than what it was when I first started, because they were like, yeah, we know you're getting out. So it's kind of one of those, like, I'm going to get everything from the cow before it dies kind of thing. And that was kind of the mentality.
Sure.
And I think that's the biggest thing. Like and it applies to business too, right? So if you're an interrogator or just a business person in general, and you say, I'm strictly going to do this and I'm never going to grow and evolve, your business is eventually going to fall. Your interrogation skills are eventually going to collapse because everything changes, right? So even inside of interrogations, the way we react is different because of the things that have happened even now with COVID and with, Black Lives Matter movement, all these different things. And you would say, well, why would that affect interrogations in Afghanistan? Well, because the things that we're doing in other countries are also being used as fuel to say how we act as people, right? So I always, and for me, I was coming post Abu Ghraib, right? Like I was post all kinds of abuse. There were the reports coming out about Iraqi torture and all these different things, right? So interrogation was very different for me because people used to joke and say that prior to that, it was the Wild West. And while there was still a level of freedom and autonomy, there was definitely more control. I mean, when you went into detention facilities, there were multiple legal entities that were regulating what you did,
Absolutely.
Right? And that's not to say that's bad. That definitely has its place. But there was a difference between what it was and what it is now, right? And it still continues to evolve and the line moves. And if you don't evolve your interrogation technique, if you say, because for me, when I went through training on force, right? Like they were transitioning the Russia packets over to Afghanistan, like over to Middle Eastern insurgency.
Okay, we got to spend a moment here. I would need to get one definition from you because you said it a couple of times. I want to make sure people understand what is on the X.
Oh yeah. So when you're on the objective, right? So if you go out on a mission and let's say you're dropping from a helo or you're infilling into a village or you went on a patrol and you're in that area. So the X would be your objective. So let's say take your subdivision, think of your housing area, right? and there's 15 houses, and we know that your house is the house we want to go to, that would be the X, right? X marks the spot where the treasure is. So I guess it's kind of a fun way to say it, but
just, people
that's
don't
the place that you're going to go.
Yeah, they don't typically get that image. Like normally it's like you're in this soundproof room with the one-way mirror and all that's like, okay, that happens.
Not always.
But not always. And you're in the field, and you're hasty, fast interrogation interview techniques. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, when did you go through the schoolhouse? What year?
So I went through in 2008.
When did the wall come down and the whole Russia thing fall apart?
So it was evolving out as I was coming in.
Yeah.
So they were restructuring a lot based on what they had seen, because like anything else, you have to get your knowledge before you start training people to it, right? So they were building everything from what they had seen from 2001 to that point, and they had a good set of data. They had people who were coming in as instructors from multiple deployments, from contracting expeditions out there. So all of that information led to them changing it. But they also said, we can't just drop it all, right? We still got to teach you force on force,
right?
Because the day that ever comes back, right? And that's always the part that makes me laugh about interrogation. Yeah. Interrogators are valuable until they're not anymore, right?
Oh yeah.
And so you keep that unit open. So the unit that I was with, the 14th MI, they were actually a unit in Vietnam. Then they were disbanded. Then they were brought back on, right? Mm-hmm. For this whole, because you want everybody wants interrogators until they're like, oh, well, we're kind of done with that war. We don't need that anymore. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then, because no matter what happens, no matter how much technology or whatever we get, right, to the point we were making earlier about connected but disconnected, that human factor is still at play, and it's still a big driver and a huge driver. And so it always cracks me up when I hear, units being disbanded, training being re-imaged to move more towards we're turning interrogators into cyber, right?
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah,
but then you're going to need them back, and you're going to say, hey, where are all my interrogators, right? And for me, it was beneficial, right? I joined, and they gave me a huge bonus to come on as an interrogator. But there's just a certain level of just staying in that craft and living it every day.
Yeah.
That you can't. I mean, you become an expert in it, and human interaction is a very, I don't know, it's just a evolving thing. And if you're out of it for even a period of time, so like even now, like I'm talking about my experiences, and while I still do it a little bit with interviews for my podcast and business consulting and things of that nature, and talking about the techniques I've used, the world is a lot different inside of interrogation. I have buddies who are still doing it, and they're like, dude, yeah, it's a completely different game. Like we've changed how we look at things.
So a couple of things real quick here. Roman has a podcast called Let's Get Real. I have the link on the page. If you can't find that really easy, just let me know, or you can just, at me at Twitter or wherever it's at, and I'll shoot you the link to his stuff. And yeah, it's a cool podcast. What I've seen of it, I mean, I think you guys would like it. But let's get back into this part of it. So in terms of the timing, when I went through the schoolhouse, again, I'm a counterintelligence agent, so we're like a sibling thing. You really can't do what I do, and I really can't do what you do, but we can fill in. We're like the utility player for each other. Like, okay, I need someone to help with this interrogation. Hey, Pete, we're going to run these things. I'm able to go, oh, okay, and I can dance a little bit, And same thing with like the collection in the field. Yes, you're a collector, but I need you to be, more interview, less interrogation. And that's easy to say. And you and I can understand, like, we are dramatically different in how we approach these things. You can cross the line, but at some point to really master it, I know enough to go, look, I can interrogate somebody, but I can't do what you do. I've not done 1,000 interrogations. You can do what I do. You and I both know, like, if I was to come into the booth, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to follow your lead. And if you were to go on a patrol, you were going to shut up and you're going to follow my lead. And that's just because we have that professional respect. Like, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. So going back to the Russia thing, Russia was over when I was in the Army, and we were still learning fold a gap and force on force and all that stuff in the schoolhouse. But then you realize pretty quickly that interrogators were being shut down. They were taking, even counterintelligence agents, like, we're not going to be doing this kind of stuff. So turn in your M16s. We're going to give everybody 9 mils, and you guys are just going to wear suits and do. And then, like, literally, like, in the middle of that transition, where they had condensed the CI and the interrogation assets together, and we were going to get no more interrogators at all, Bosnia broke out. And all of a sudden, we hit, I mean, look, they call it IPW, prisoners of war. All of a sudden, there was an IPW mission of sorts. But you guys were still we were going to learn language as a default, and you guys were going to be more focused on HUMINT as opposed to interrogation. And then midstream, that shut down. And then to hear that, over 10 years later, you still have that force on force approach. That's one of the things that's remarkable to me. And I want to get your thoughts on this in a second, but let me finish running my yap first. One of the things that I got to do because of how I approached my career, and I was better at being with than in the Army, was I got to stay at the ground level. So, if you get promoted to E5, you're still working in the field. E6, a decent amount. After that, you're done, unless you're a warrant officer who gets out and goes on a team. But even then, the vast majority of your time is on staff, is in support, behind a desk. But I was able to go out over and over and over again. I think that our ability to contract out our capabilities makes more sense because it is a thing you have to flex in and flex out. And then you want that master capability at the ground level. Like, I don't need to know operations. I don't need to know analysis. But I get a sense that really is what we need, because most of the collectors I met, and this gets all the way back around to the question I want to ask you, had very little knowledge coming out of the schoolhouse because it just doesn't work. And I would say that what you really need to do is, like, when we go through training, this is for the audience, you learn in the classroom, like someone talks to you about interrogation, and then you get in the booth for a few hours. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, when I did interviews, this is going back to 94, but I will say I spent less than 10 hours in front of somebody trying to figure out how to collect the most challenging thing to collect. So what's your sense of that specific kind of thing? And then how long did it really take you for you to go, I'm not a total monkey now, I can actually kind of do this job?
Yeah. So I think for me, the schoolhouse was a great foundation, right? Like anything else, it gave you the basis, but it was also school, right? So for me, the moment I realized what the answers were for the test, I was like, oh, okay, this is easy, right?
Yeah.
Like, I just got to go down this road. Oh, I need to like BS about rapport with you for 30 minutes.
Right.
And that was the thing we found, right? So the funny part is, after all of that, like, the reason I was laughing so hard as you were saying all that, because it was exactly true, right? You would jump in these classrooms from, like, let's say your day starts at 5 a.m. You get up to go do PT, you do PT for an hour, eat breakfast, you're in your first class by 8:30, right? Yeah. So you're in class, and you're then in class till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? And in that time frame, you've maybe done one booth session that's maybe 2 hours max, right? Or something varying, right? Like, there's all kinds of different, depending on the time, the level, where you were at in the stages. But that's just a rough, like, let's compare it to college, right? And so this little piece, you're writing reports, you're taking tests, you're doing all these different things. It is a schoolhouse. And so, like any other school, if you can figure out the rules of the school or what the curriculum is, that's it. Yeah. Once you know it, and you're talking about interrogators here, right? So people who are manipulators by nature, or they kind of think on a different level, right? Mm-hmm. And now you're putting those skills out for them. So for the ones who really shined and understood it, a couple of weeks in, they figured out exactly what the game was, and then they said, okay, cool, like, I can play this game, right? Yeah. We had to build our own interrogation book, so we built it, and then we started playing that game and said, okay, cool, you want 30 minutes of rapport, here it is, right? You'd build this nice little story, and you go from there. But it gave a good foundation. And then I went to a unit that was building up to be kind of a catch-all unit. And so we went there. So then immediately after that, we get trained on read interrogation. So we get trained on what the police use for interrogation. We get trained on the Wicklander-Zulawski course, which is handwriting analysis, written statement analysis, things of that nature. We then get some negotiation from West Point negotiators and psychologists. We get, mental, the psychological mental aspect of it training. We then get individual specialized training into where we're going. And then the best course that I took was, or in my opinion, it was called JAG, the Joint Analyst Interrogator Collaboration course. And it was where you learned how to basically work with an analyst. And that course was done with Marines, Air Force, Army, Navy. We were all together, right? And we were taking this course talking about how to interact with each other and how to understand each other. And it was really once all those pieces kind of came into play that I had a better understanding, and then said, okay, here we go, right? And I go out to Iraq, and I'm on a small team doing a mission in Taji, right? Taji and Tarmiya. And it was really there where because I mean, that was my first time to step into an interrogation booth to do it. And the book was great, but then once you get in there and start doing it, and for me, one of the big humbling moments was I had an interpreter who basically, he was like, hey man, like I've done this for multiple different interrogators over the years. You probably should not go in and say that little help me thing that you did. Like that does not go over well with this group. I'm like, oh, cool. Right. So it was a little bit just to your point earlier, like you got to fall on your face. And while it gave me a good foundation, a good overview, a good baseline, dude, I didn't know anything. I went out there, and then it was like, so then you do strategic, and then you go tactical, right? And you start doing on the ground. And that's like, to your point, a totally different world, right? Different. You now are the dude you're going to interrogate to get information from. You want him to tell you about something a couple houses up before the next group gets in there. But he's also been rocked by a flashbang. These dudes in night vision, full armor, kitted up, have come in and just like pulled him out of his house, thrown him on the ground, zip tied him, right? Yeah. And so it's like a totally different thing, right? And so they're two very different worlds. And so I tried to bring what I did in the one world over to that, and that didn't quite translate the same way, right? So I had to, so I had a person tell me like, hey, don't ever pull that again. Like, I get it, and I know what you were doing. Don't ever do that again. Like, that's not how this rolls. And that lesson was powerful for me, because I was so set on, once I knew it, and my way was the only way, right? And that's where I came to that place. That interrogation is constantly evolving.
That sounds like I yelled at you.
No, but it was an NCO. So
no, but that's such a great thing, because I can see from your report when you write it where you've messed up. I can see the dance. If you write your report well, if you can't write your report well, then I'm going to be like, you can't write a report. Let's start there, because I don't even know what happened. But you can see the control in the conversation. Like if your answer, it's okay for them to ask you questions, but like if they're asking all the questions, I'm going to look at you and be like, who's running who's and there's so many nuanced things that you're talking about in there. We also often get object fixated. And so it's just a quick story, and I'm positive you'll have something to talk about this, but we had a kid come in, he's just sweating, and people in Iraq typically don't sweat. Yeah, they're hot, but they're accustomed to it, and they're not doing high physical activity where they're just pouring sweat. So this kid's sweating, he's rocking back and forth, and this team, and here's another thing I want to say, and this is an aside going back a few minutes, but this is important to understand. You can go in and get trained with a group of 30 people, and your boss, who was a truck driver before they walked into that room, comes out and they've got the exact same amount of experience as you. Yes, they're an NCO, they understand how to do Army shit, but the ultimate thing is like, that guy is crap at this, and he's now my boss, or she's now my boss. And by the way, just like you said, there's so much control. You may have someone that has not even an intel background, not even an MP background, allowing you or disallowing you to do certain things, and literally thinks they're a better interrogator than you are, even though they've got zero time in the booth doing any interrogation. So all of that stuff goes into the mix of problems that we have, right? So we get this team, it's a baby team, everybody's 100% green. They had done a condensed CI course via video teleconference. Terrifying. If you guys can't understand, terrifying. So they deploy. This kid's sitting there, he's sweating, he's rocking back and forth. Something is physically wrong with this guy, but they're so object fixated, which we all go through. We all do this. I come in and I'm like, hey, what's going on with this guy? And first off, they're not in a closed room. They're just in the office. Like, this guy had walked in and they didn't do anything to protect this guy's identity. So I'm like, what the fuck's wrong with you guys? But they're like, this guy came to the camp and he's got information. And I'm like, looks like he's got a problem. what's wrong with them? And so I basically, and again, I'm not even in the Army. I'm a contractor, right? So I look at the interpreter and I say, ask this guy if he's all right. And he's like, okay, I'll ask him. And he's like, no, he's in a lot of pain. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, well, we know he's in a lot of pain, but we're going to let him go. I mean, you're going to let him go? This guy is in physical distress. And so I take over the whole thing and I'm like, what's wrong with him? It's like, oh, well, and he's got this literally open wound. He'd had surgery done and it was completely open.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm going to take this guy to the hospital because that's where he needs to go. And they're like, oh, we're not allowed to take him to the hospital. I'm like, I'm going to let the hospital tell me that. I'm going to let the hospital look at this guy and say, yeah, fuck that guy, because they're not going to do it. And so they were going to have a full session with this guy. And then the doctors get into like, yeah, he's got an infection. If no one would have attended to it, he wouldn't have died today, but he would have been in horrible pain. At some point, he would have died without attention. So yeah, we cleaned him up, gave him some medicine, sent him on his way. It's not a normal thing they do, but look at what had to happen. Someone who has experience and savvy had to walk in the room and say, what the fuck are you guys doing? You know, like, stop. And then so the next time we saw that guy, I also determined from them, my team, that this guy was going camp to camp and talking to people. And I'm like, we're not talking to this guy anymore. Who does he belong to? Because ultimately for the audience, that person will belong to somebody. The team that first discovers him, kind of like you discover him, you own him. So if they bounce around camp to camp, you say, hey, you can't talk to us here. You got to go to that camp or whatever. So to the training point, there's a lot of problems that come into this. And this is more human related, but I know you'll have stories like that. But also you can't get so fixated on your job and the intel that's coming out that you lose sight that this is a person. And if that flashbang has gone off, spending a few minutes, you know, going, hey, I'm a human, you're a human. Are you all right? Are you okay? Can I get you some water? And not just like, can I get you a drink? Maybe a cookie? Like, no, motherfucker, are you hungry? When was the last time you ate? Oh, it's been a long time. All right, before we do anything, let's get you some food. I mean, that's how I roll, and not to be in any way manipulative towards them, but just to say, I give a fuck about you. You might go to jail, but I actually don't want you to be in worse condition when you leave my care, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I think that's also, so a bunch of points to that. But first, I think the thing that we see from movies is that, you know, they just bring these people in whatever condition and they just start like talking to them and then they start waterboarding them, start sticking fingers in wounds and stuff like that. And I'm like, dude,
that's my favorite move.
A, that's horribly unsanitary. Like, but B, like, no, you know, it's just that obviously, like, let's just think about it from a logic perspective, right? If you have a wound, you're not even going to want to talk to me. Or if you do, you're going to say whatever the heck gets you out of there quickest to go deal with that, right? Yes. Like, so like, let's just think of that whole little, you know, the statement that torture doesn't work because, you know, you elicit the response, like all of that, right? Like, take that little argument down its train and let people fight however they want to. But point being, like, just put yourself in that perspective. If you have a crazy headache, do you want somebody talking to you and bothering you, right? Yeah. Like, if you don't feel good, do you really want to sit and have a conversation? And are you really going to give to that conversation? So if you're trying to get the best information, you want the person in the best frame of mind to be able to do that. And the second
I got to jump in here and say this too. If the person has tuberculosis, when would you like to find that out?
Yes, right. Yes. And I always laugh at that part. And that's the thing too, right? When I say I'm an interrogator, like the first question is always, so what's it like to waterboard a person and all this stuff? I'm like, well, that's such a weird question. First of all, like, I don't even know how to answer that. That's just, I think you should go think about what you just asked me. But secondly, I want the best information. Like, that's the goal, to get the best information. And I always tell this story when I say, you know, what's it like being an interrogator? I said, one of the best stories, the best intel I ever got from a guy. I gave him a cheeseburger. We started talking. He loved that cheeseburger. So every week he would come in and I would give him a cheeseburger. And then he liked to draw. So I started giving him paper to draw. So he started by drawing his family and his kids. And then he drew like terrorists. And then he started drawing Izzat al-Duri and like all these different like political figures and all these people, right? Yes. Who are doing things that we now know are like tied to ISIS and stuff like that, right? So at the time they were like these up and comers, right? And so we're like tracking them down and starting to build files on them and all of this because this guy, like, because I gave him a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't like beat him into a bloody pulp. I didn't, deprive him of anything. I actually gave him something. I let him do the things he liked to do. And I think, like, to your point, like, if you just think about it like a human being, like, what actually works? Well, being human always works, right? Like there's that German interrogator, and right now, as I'm like, of course his name would leave me when I want to talk about him. But he was in World War II. He actually, at the end of World War II, came back and taught a little bit at the Air Force Academy, because he would have downed pilots come into his his internment camp, and he would just go for walks on them and talk with them. And, he'd point things out, and they'd start telling him like, oh yeah, no, that one's blue because that's the color we use to signal that this is this type of plane or this and that. Right. So people can tell easily from the ground. And at the end of it, the prisoners that would come back, they would go, I had no clue that I told him anything of value. Yeah. And I 1,000% believe them, because some of the best information I got, people had no clue. It's called circular questioning if you want to go look it up. But the whole premise behind it is you just pepper it in a real conversation, and kind of honestly, to a certain degree, what we're doing right now, right? Yeah. We talk about it. We go down like this kind of humanity trail. We let the conversation flow where it goes. And then, oh, hey, by the way, this relates to this. Tell me about that, right? And so that's, truthfully, I would say, honestly, that's probably the best approach strategy or interrogation strategy, because you weave in whatever it is, right? Obviously you're weaving in egos and prides and fears and, incentives and whatever else, right? But at the end of the day, you're just having a conversation. And that's really all an interrogation is when you break it down to its core. So if you can just have a conversation, and not a fake conversation, because that's the other piece. Like, everyone's like, oh, well, like, even when I was manipulating my story, I was still building it on some foundation of truth. Yeah. Because everyone can tell when you're lying. Like, we think that only interrogators can tell when I'm lying. No, we all have a BS meter, and it all goes off when we hear something crazy, right? So yeah, man. I mean, I just honestly, those things crack me up when people think that, and people think, it's all 0 dark 30 and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm like, dude, it's really a lot more just. And like, think about it. If I just hit you with a flashbang in a building and I have you outside, like, and I start saying, hey, are you okay? What do you need? We're looking for this person. This is what's going on. We were told that your house was, obviously that person's response is going to be, dude, that is not my house. You're wrong. That house is over there. Go get that dude. He's the guy, not me. Why did you flashbang me? Right. Yeah. So
and if he's lying to you, he's still flex cuffed. He's not going anywhere. You always have time to rough somebody up. You always have time for that. Not that we do that ever, but there's always time. If you can start with an easy path of just being human. So just for the audience, but when my ability got several abilities above anybody else that was around, one of the things I realized was just, if I could find a way to exchange trust, and I mean real trust, like testable trust, if I could find ways to give them respect, and this is sort of akin to ego up, but if I could say to them, hey, listen, I want to make sure you're all right, but I would love to talk to you again. I just am fascinated by talking to you. Can we have another conversation? And then, this is a source, but same thing. Like, just even as someone who's incarcerated, you say, listen, don't do anything crazy until I talk to you again. I'm dying to talk to you tomorrow. Is that cool with you? And if you can make an appointment with somebody, what time tomorrow can we talk? Or whenever, when can we talk where you're safe and everything else? You know what they're going to do? This is the crazy thing. This is great. Roman, you're going to love this. When you ask someone for an appointment and you come and you show up at that time, they'll be there. Like, when will this work for you? Okay, great. And then if you host them, like if you could bring a source, and this is a source operation, but still akin, right? If you can bring that person into the American Chow Hall and go, what do you want to eat? You ever had a cheesesteak? Want some ice cream? You know what their answer is going to be? Yes. You want to stuff your pockets full of a bunch of this food and take it home to your kids? Yes. Okay, cool. Let's do all of that. And for the price of, I don't know, $30 worth of food, I now have respect from this guy. He knows that I care for him. He gets to go home and be a hero to his kids. Woo! Yeah. Give me as much of that as you can. And then here's the next thing is when the commander's like, Hey, Pete, who are you talking to? Oh, have you met, Haji Hashim? He's one of the most influential tribal leaders in this entire region. And I'm just having a conversation. Now the commander's like, Pete is talking to people that nobody else knows about. And they for sure pull a deck on him and try to see who he is. All of these things happen because I'm not focused on the right now intel. Where are the bombs? I find it all out because I take this guy and I create a real relationship with them. I look out for them. How can I help this person do something they've not been able to do in years? Like eat a banana. Fuck, man. Not only eat a banana, take a bunch of bananas with you. And then, the contractor for the chow hall get mad and be like, shut your mouth. And actually, I've already gone in ahead of time saying, I'm going to be working in here. I'm going to take whatever food I want, and you're going to let me do it. Do you need a letter from the commander? No? Okay, cool. And then it's already set up. And so everybody's like, treat this guy with respect,
No, I'm with you, man. I think we overthink this whole thing, right? Whether you're an interrogator or not. Like everyone overthinks the entire thing. Television doesn't help. Completely agree. But really and truly, I mean, it's a lot of strong report writing, strong rapport building, and just being as real as you can be, right? Like obviously there's always some form of manipulation and distrust because at the end of the day, you're two separate people on two separate sides of an issue and you're trying to get your point across, right? So there's going to be this little thing, but at the more you can remove your own bias, the stronger you can be at it, right? Because if you go into a booth and you're like, well, this dude's a terrorist, blah, blah, like he could be a 10-year-old kid who needed bread for his family, right? Like I've interrogated kids like that. Yeah. They did it because they had to, or because someone told them they did, or even worse. So for me as a foster kid, some of these kids were abused and forced by their abusers to do this stuff. Yeah. Like they didn't have a choice in the matter, and they were actually hoping to get caught. Like they were like, yeah, this dude beat me, go get him. And I'm like, cool, dude, and so I think if you automatically paint that lens of they're bad, and to everything that's going on right now, right? All cops are bad. All black people are bad. All white people are racist, right? Yeah. You paint these broad strokes. That's a problem, right? And especially inside of an interrogation, because the moment you go in with that bias, it's game. Yeah. You can't bring that bias back, right? Because you have that bias, you show them that bias, they see that bias, and they're like, yeah, no, I'm not. Like, you might as well just cancel it and let someone else go in there because you've just ruined any chance whatsoever.
This is, and the thing is that does happen, and a good leader's gonna be like, swap, change, try something else, get somebody else in there. That whole thing you just said is really the essence of almost everything that we try to do, as humans, like people of color, fuck that people lives matter, it's when you start with a racist premise, you are only a racist and intolerance. Like you have to, and it's hard to not be intolerant. It's hard. I think that's the default. So in general, when you look at this person, we have to interrogate or interview horrible people, but I've got to sit in front of them and say genuinely, like, I don't care about all that stuff. That's in the past. I care about right now, where are you at right now kind of thing. I've talked to people that have killed people for the pleasure of it. Yeah. And it's like, God, but it's also, I don't know that I would act differently given if I bring up in their circumstance where power is earned through death and intimidation. So to come in that way, it's wholly unfair to the process, to that person, and to yourself. One of the things I've also learned, and you can literally say this to someone who's got a lot of rank and has absolutely the ability to say, I am an expert at interrogation or collection or whatever it is. I can say to that person, but we've all learned this from our mistakes. And they'll say yes. And I'll say, so how often is your bullshit meter wrong? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden we get a problem because they're like, my bullshit meter's not wrong. And I'm like, well, now we got a problem.
Yeah, it better be wrong because otherwise it's not getting better. Dude, when I first started, my BS meter was totally off. Yeah. Like I would think people were terrorists that weren't, right? Like, and the file would say they're not a terrorist. And I'd be like, yeah, he is. Yeah. And again, biases, right? And so I had to work through all of that. But eventually I got to a place where, and I think it's just humanity in general, right? You judge people by their character.
I've done all these things, by the way, same things.
Yeah. So it's kind of that piece. And I think to that other, like people are like, oh, why why are you able to have hard conversations? Like, why are you able to open up and talk about your abuse in foster care, you know, your affair on your wife? Why are you able to talk about all these different things you've done? And I'm like, because I've sat in front of rooms across from people who literally tell me like they got pleasure from planning a bomb that they knew killed Americans, or, you know, rolling up on somebody that we know just got done shooting at Americans and potentially killing, like injuring people, and we don't know whether they're going to make it or not. Like, when you talk to those kind of people and you can hear their side of it, I can hear anybody's side, right? Like Democrat, Republican, Independent, Black Lives Matter, you know, the other end of it, right? Like, I'll have a conversation with a racist. I don't agree with their conversation, but I'll have a conversation with them, because if you're not able to have that conversation, you're not able to grow, and you're not able to combat that. Because if I don't know it, I can't combat it. So I got to learn it. You got to know your enemy, right? Like, that's the old military art of war adjective, right? Like, you've got to know your enemy. And it was the same thing for interrogations. I had to sit in rooms with people who were bad to know what bad looks like. Like, I had to fall on my face to be able to say, got it. That's what that looks like. Okay. So if I tell them that, they're going to think of me as inferior, kind of like that, you know, full circle back to that first story, right? Like, I had to mess up in that room to learn, oh, gotcha. Okay. If I say these things, I'm going to look like an inferior person, and I'm going to lose all credibility. And the funny thing is, later on, I made a mistake very similar to that. And I walked right out of the booth and I told man, we're handing him over. Get an interrogator on deck, find somebody that's super strong, super aggressive. The bigger the muscles, the better. We need that person to be the one to take it over. Right. And we handed that interrogation over, and it worked. That person got tons of information. But had I not made that mistake earlier, I wouldn't have been able to operate in that space and say, I messed up. I just messed up right here. I lost it. Because you'll know it. Like, when you've been an interrogator for a while, or even inside of a business, right? When you're doing your sales pitch, you know when you mess up that pitch, or you know when you mess up. And the problem is people always say, I have to come back from that mistake. I have to fix it. Sometimes you don't get to.
You just
sometimes
most of the time
you gotta hand it. You gotta hand it over to somebody else, or you gotta say, "Hey, man, I dropped it. Here's a recommendation of another person you can go with." Right? But that person's going to respect you, and they're going to remember that inside of business, and even inside of interrogation, that sets them up for success with the next person to go with, because they know that you, as an interrogator, came in and said, "Hey, I messed up. I'm not the best person for you. We're not aligned. Here's the guy who is aligned to you." Well, you've already set that person up for success before they even stepped in the room, because you gave them credibility.
Absolutely. That ability to hand that to again, let go of ego and go, you don't have to fix this. There's a whole bunch of us here with a lot of expertise, and you can do nothing wrong and still not be the person. Just, you're not the person. Or your job, it's like you're batting leadoff. You're just there to establish rapport. Even shitty rapport will work from there. Like, this guy's angry, new guy, new approach, new effort. Let's, work on these things. It is not like on TV. That's for sure. It's so
we're not all individual Jason Bournes just going through and just running a whole section of a country on our own, right? Like, it's literally getting handed over and pushed through to a person. And I think that's the part that I think made me so good moving into business consulting and everything else, was because I was able to say, oh, okay, I'm part of a team. Like, I'm not always going to be the guy rolling up on the target, guns blazing, or I'm not always going to be the guy to get the best piece of information. But I don't know what my conversation is going to do, right? Like, I could have that conversation that then makes that person tell them where all the bombs are, right? And is it any less of an achievement because I didn't personally achieve it? Not at all, right? And I think if people would start thinking that way, and that's just humanity in general, right? Not just in an interrogation room.
Well,
but for interrogators, like, obviously.
At the top of Interrogator Mountain are people that are very good at one specific aspect of interrogation. They may be able to do certain things well. And there are certainly interrogators that move comfortably between a variety of things. But it gets very spiky. And you're right. The person who's great at immediate on-the-X interrogation is not going to be better than the best strategic debriefer. That person will be significantly better at that skill. They're both way up there. But at some point, you have to allow someone else to be, like, this is how we do this here. And then you meld into how that works for you. And then you go forward. But most interrogators struggle because of ego and their own overblown sense of how good they are at the job and how often they fail. I mean, I've made completely wrong assumptions about people and gone, lesson learned. Sometimes people tell you the truth. And I used to have a dial like, don't trust, trust, right? And then I'm like, hold on, fuck that dial. And this is how I learned it. Like literally, like this is over years of learning. And I'm like, it's not trust, don't trust. It's, can I extend that person trust and can I get trust back? Can I build trust? So don't default one way or the other. And if I could build trust with someone, it didn't matter if they were valuable to me in terms of immediate intel collection. They mattered because they were part of my network, my node of people that I had to have. And maybe they never paid the bills, but that was a new person that I could always engage with and we had trust. And if you can build trust with 40 people while you're deployed, you are a lot better than someone who's focused on that's a terrorist. You know?
Yeah. And you don't know that source doesn't get access 2 years later after you're already gone, right? But they remember, oh, Pete wasn't a jerk to me when I came in, so I'm going to go back in. Oh, Pete's not here, but Bob is, and Bob's not an asshole. Okay, cool. I'm going to work with Bob, right? Yeah. Like I get so, and interrogators, and I've seen it, and I've been it, and now people that I know outside of it, they're just, that mindset is so. I'm an interrogator. This is an elite job. This is amazing. And then you start throwing in like those 1% things, right? Working with special operations, deploying in combat environment, like all these different pieces. And then all of a sudden that, like to your point, that ego gets really inflated. But if you can kind of keep that, like ego's the enemy in anything. If you can kind of keep that in check and you can say, okay, like I'm a part of a machine, right? And I make all these components come together to make things work. Then that's how true success happens. And the interrogators who, just like the business people, just like the fitness people, just like anything else, right? The people with a level of humility and understanding that I'm not the best, but I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at.
Right.
Those are the people who succeed. Like I had one of the best interrogators I knew. Like they were super great. They could not work well with other people. So they did great on individual ops, but you put them in a strategic environment where they had to work with an analyst and do teamwork and things of that nature. They couldn't do it because they couldn't be a part of that team. But it's kind of judging that fish's ability to climb a tree. That doesn't make him any less of being able to go out on tactical operations and find great information, which that information then helps when you're in the strategic environment. But if you group him with an analyst, he just wasn't able to, he just couldn't get past it. I don't know why. People talk to him all the time and said, dude, how is this so hard for you? Right. But it just wasn't his thing. And that's okay. Like just like there's female approach strategies that I will never be able to use. They're viewed as a mother in some to younger people to think like I'm never going to have that level of a connection. Like I'm not going to be able to do those things. And at the moment where you realize the things you can't do, business, life, interrogation, like whatever category it is, the moment you realize that, then you can win because you can say, I'm going to double down on what I'm good at, but I'm also going to be aware of what I'm bad at. I'm going to know the basis of it. I'm going to try to be okay at it, right? So I don't just shit the bed every time I do it. But then I'm also going to know who can I go to when I get past my level of comfort in this so that they can kind of pick it up. And that was how true success happened, whether it was in a combat environment, a strategic environment, post-military, working with consultants, right? Like that's how it happens.
So I've purposely not covered a lot of your background because that stuff's in other podcasts. You guys should definitely look up Roman and check out some of that background because it is remarkable where you've come from and the fact that you're this well adjusted. It's not easy for anybody coming up, but no one would pick your path. So I purposely not covered that stuff because I really wanted to get into these nuts and bolts kind of things because there's only so many folks that can have this kind of conversation. So everybody should definitely go check out Let's Get Real and know that podcast is top notch in terms of like you're just not going to find that kind of content anywhere else. If this stuff's fascinating to you, for sure, check out Roman. What else do we need to cover, man? You want to ask me any questions at all? I guess I've done all the big work.
No, you did. I like what you're doing. I've chimed into a couple of yours. I just like the idea of this conversation. And it's funny because while interrogations is a topic that's talked about, it's kind of glanced over, right? Like I said, that question is either, oh, you're like a human lie detector or you beat people, right? Like those are the two extremes. So it's been really nice. Obviously, at Real Talk with Roman on Instagram is kind of an area where I'm kind of trying to grow my presence and do more conversations. I just like having real conversations, and I appreciate you kind of taking this down a different route. Cause like I said, most people don't focus on this. And I think that it's good that someone like you is hitting these conversations just to kind of remove some of that stigma. Like I said, like the two realms are beating people or human lie detector. And really and truly it's not even really in the middle. It's just completely different than those two avenues, right? Like there's so much more. So
I want to recommend a book for people if you're interested in this stuff, especially you interrogators and collectors out there. I'm looking directly at you and saying, if you don't know this work, then you don't know shit about your job. Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. That will help you correct what you think you know about people, because you don't know anything until you have a mastery of that work. And then the work that goes into that work to help them put it together. There's so much resource material in there. Like your realization of what you don't know is so much more important than what you actually know. So Mary asked a question. I don't want to keep you too long because you and I have things to do, but she says, would you rather work alone or with a team for your interrogation guys?
So yeah, I will take that. And then I'm going to add one more book to that.
Please.
People need to read a book about some form of book about marketing or branding. I recommend the Story Brand, because you need to know how to tell your story. Because when you're having that interrogation and building that rapport, the story is what matters, right? So some book on storytelling, I highly recommend. I recommend the Story Brand, just because it's just really, really good.
I'll put those links in the show notes, by the way, for everybody.
Yeah. And so as far as that work, so I actually enjoyed working with a team, because I just think I'm a piece of the whole. And I think in every environment I've worked with a team. Like I've done some solo operations, but really and truly where I've really been able to get the most results is with teams, right? Because nobody can do it all by themselves. Like there are no Jason Bournes in interrogation. Like it's not real, right? That whole, like there's a secret CIA black cell of people that just all by themselves are James Bond and take over the world. Yeah, sure. Let's play the conspiracy theory game. Maybe it exists, but they still got a team of people that help them go do what they do. Like I've always said, if you don't have a supply guy giving you bullets, you can't shoot them. Like, so it's the same thing. It's the same thing for interrogation. If I don't have an analyst, if I don't have SIGINT guys, if I don't have team guys rolling on the targets to get people, like all of that. So yeah, man, I'm a huge team proponent, whether it's in business or interrogation.
One of the things that I learned along the way too, because of my unique access and experience, I would tell the commander, battalion commander, and a battalion commander, for those who don't know, 1,000 people are under that person. That person is God of their world. You do not stay in their camp, no matter who you are, unless they allow it. And they don't kick people off for a living, but if they don't want you there, guess where you're not going to be? There.
Oh yeah.
So when you go to tell these guys, like, I know the future, here's what's going to happen, this is the timeline, and this is how you're going to treat me, and they look at you and you nail down the timeline because you've done it so many times, you have this enormous respect. And when I say to them, I'm going to tell you what I see at the ground level, you're every now and then going to have to give me some context and adjust how I'm seeing things, because you know so much more at the strategic and higher levels. And every single time, every commander had to correct how I saw something, because I'm not Jason Bourne. I can't do this by myself. I do need someone else's lens. I need someone to say, here are questions we're desperate to know the answer to, not like the basic obvious things, but like these hard questions, so that I know what to go look for, and you have to have a team to do that. They've got to trust me to do my job, because when I write my report, Roman, you know how this goes when you collect, I see a totally different patrol than everybody else on the patrol. That's my job. I have unique access. I have to bring back information that no one else can bring, because I am better at collecting than those guys. They're supposed to report on goats and waterworks and all those things and how the village was negative. And then I grab that one or two people off to the side and I say, tell me what's really going on. And they're like,
yep.
Yeah, Taliban runs this entire region. They're here right now, but I'm not going to tell you that. And I'm like, got it. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because I used to always say, I will debrief with the actual patrol, post patrol. The entire patrol, I'm not connected to them. Obviously, I'm in the line of sight. Like, I'm not like way off, like out in the distance doing my own thing. But I don't care. If y'all are over there talking to these group of people, I want to be on the opposite end talking to the people you're not. because you can recap everything you did.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
each of you are gathering information. And you don't even know it. It's my job to pull that. So y'all go do your patrol, do your perimeters, do your little, like, we're going to hand out medicine, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go over here to the people that don't want, like, I'm an outcast kind of guy.
Yeah.
Put me in the circle where nobody else wants to be, because I'm going to come, because that's where everything's happening. Because those people are looking in on everybody else. They see what's going on. Nobody values them. So they're kind of off and alone in the distance doing whatever they want. So they're not seen, but they hear everything, right? So that was where I always tried to be on those kind of operations.
Yeah.
Because I got that team. They're my team. They're my tribe. They're going to give me information post. Like, I can get all that.
Yeah.
But that person who's off on the own, I'm not going to be able to see them after we roll off.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're totally right. And one of the things that I knew, like, as my bellwether, like, is what I'm doing working, is when the commander says, give Pete an NCO, because I'll tell him, like, I am not in any way focused on my safety when I'm working, and it doesn't look like I'm working. It looks like I'm drinking. It looks like I'm having a great time, but I am. And so, like, if you want to help me, you have someone looking the other way, making sure I'm all right, taking a picture of us or whatever it's going to be. And I had the best E5s and E6s that are like, Pete, I love what you're doing. I will take care of you. I will keep you safe. And I put again, back to the team thing, and I would be like, hey, let's get away from this group. Let's go over and talk to some of these guys. And then, ask them the no shit questions that no one else has the ability to ask and get the answers. It's cool, man. This is a great chat. I've enjoyed it. That's why we've gone for an hour and 15 minutes.
It's been fun. I could keep going. I mean, and easy. Like I said, I do real talk. So what's the point of talking if we're not going to get deep in it?
Right. Well, listen, everybody go check out Roman's podcast and look in the show notes for those book recommendations. And thanks again, Roman, for all you do. I mean, I dig it. I dig it that we have the ability to spread these words out there. Hopefully someone from the interrogation world hears this and goes, oh my God, and we can flatten the ramp for them, because those oh my God moments are out there, and it's just great to be able to share these kind of stories. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
For sure. No, thank you. I appreciate it.